Hello, I'd like to report a violation of neighborhood rules.
What do you want, Karen?
When Karen, our HOA president, saw me open my garage, she dialed 911 screaming I stole her new car. But the truth was about to expose something much darker. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I pressed the button, and my garage door lifted with its usual metallic groan. The sunlight spilled in, glinting off the hood of my classic silver Lexus sedan, my pride and joy purchased nearly 8 years ago. I barely had time to admire it before a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, that's my car." Across the street stood Karen, the iron-fisted president of the HOA. Her face turned crimson as she jabbed her phone at me. "I just bought that car last week. I'm calling 911. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers rolled up, lights flashing. Neighbors peeked through curtains as Karen dramatically recounted her version of events, pointing at me as if I were a thief caught red-handed. I calmly produced the original purchase paperwork, title, and registration, but Karen waved her hands, shouting, "He forged those. I know what I bought." The officers seemed torn. It was absurd, but they had to file a report. Word spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the HOA's private Facebook group was buzzing like a hornet's nest someone had kicked wide open. My phone kept pinging with notifications, each one pulling me deeper into a storm I hadn't asked for. At first it was vague. A few cryptic posts with, "Some people just can't afford nice things without stealing them," or, "Wow, I didn't know we had criminals living in our subdivision." I scrolled, my stomach tightening. No one mentioned my name outright, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Then came the evidence. Screenshots circulated of a blurry receipt supposedly showing that Karen had bought a Lexus just last week. The paper looked like something typed in Microsoft Word with half the ink missing, but that didn't stop the comments from rolling in. "This is proof. She wouldn't lie about something like this. Unbelievable. What kind of neighbor steals a car and then has the nerve to keep it in plain sight? If he's capable of this, what else is he capable of?" I stared at the thread, pulse racing. I wanted to scream into the screen, "It's my car. I've had it for years. You've all seen me driving it." But reason had no place in the court of HOA gossip. Suddenly, I was the villain, the car thief who had apparently been lurking in their midst all along. It didn't matter that my name wasn't in the police blotter, that there was no arrest, that I had the official title and registration in my home safe. Karen had told her version first, and that meant it was the version people believed. Even my longtime neighbors began to act differently. Mrs. Dorsey, who usually waved when I brought in my trash bins, pulled her little dog closer and turned away. Mike, the guy I used to chat with about lawn care, suddenly found something fascinating on his phone whenever I walked by. The silence was louder than words. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood, my own street, the place I had worked so hard to make a home. Every garage door that opened as I passed, every pair of eyes peeking through blinds, it all felt like judgment. At night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my head. Karen screaming at me in my driveway, the flashing lights of the patrol car, the way the officer had looked at me with that measured suspicion. A thought crept in, one I hated but couldn't push away. What if they actually believed her? What if somehow this spiraled into something bigger? The HOA had power. Karen had influence. And now she had the neighborhood's ear. I wasn't just defending my reputation anymore. I was defending my right to belong, and the shadows of doubt once cast don't fade easily. The very next morning, I sat across from a sharp-eyed attorney named Rachel Alvarez. Her office smelled faintly of leather and old law books, lined with diplomas and photos of her shaking hands with city officials. She listened intently as I recounted everything. Karen's 911 call, the shouting match in front of my garage, the police showing up, and the claims about her newly purchased Lexus. Rachel leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "HOA cases can get messy," she said, "but this isn't just an HOA dispute. If she's claiming ownership of your vehicle, that's potentially fraud or worse. What I need from you is everything. Every receipt, every insurance renewal, every photo you've got of that car. Paper trails win cases. So that became my mission. For the next several days, I turned my house upside down. I dug through dusty boxes in the attic, opened old folders in my office, even unearthed a shoebox full of photographs I hadn't looked at in years. There it all was. Oil change receipts from the dealership, an insurance binder dated 5 years back, registration forms, warranty papers, and dozens of photos of me standing next to the Lexus during road trips, holidays, even random weekends when I just washed it and felt proud. The more I compiled, the stronger I felt. But then one detail made me stop cold. In her police statement, Karen had claimed she bought her Lexus from a used car lot 3 states away. At first glance, it seemed like a throwaway fact, just another one of her lies. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Why would someone like Karen, wealthy, controlling, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, go all the way across state lines to purchase a used Lexus? She always flaunted her wealth, wearing designer clothes and talking about luxury vacations. A woman like her didn't shop at discount car lots. She bought new. That itch of curiosity began to turn into suspicion. I pulled up the photos of my Lexus on my computer and zoomed in. One picture from 3 years ago caught my eye. The rear of the car gleaming in the summer sun, my custom chrome license plate frame shining brightly. It read, "Built Not Bought." I remembered ordering it as a joke because I'd worked overtime for months to afford the car. Then I thought about Karen's car. The one she screamed was hers. When she pulled up that day, I had caught a glimpse of the exact same frame. Not a cheap knockoff, not something similar. The exact same. My stomach tightened. Either this was the coincidence of a lifetime, or Karen's story was unraveling in a way that pointed to something much darker. The attorney's words echoed in my mind. Paper trails win cases. If Karen's newly bought Lexus was actually my Lexus, then somewhere out there existed paperwork, phony titles, forged bills of sale, maybe even tampered VIN numbers. And suddenly, it wasn't just about protecting my name. It was about proving, once and for all, that Karen wasn't just a meddling HOA president. She might very well be a criminal. I couldn't sleep that night. Karen's screaming fit and her false 911 call still echoed in my ears. The police had left, unconvinced by her theatrics, but not entirely dismissing her claims either. Something about the way she had waved that title paper around gnawed at me. By morning, I knew I needed answers. That's when I called in a favor. My buddy Mark worked at the DMV. We weren't supposed to bend rules like this, but after I explained the situation, an HOA president accusing me of stealing my own car, he sighed and said, "All right, bring me the info. Let's take a look." I jotted down my car's VIN from the registration in my glove box, then carefully copied the one Karen had flashed from her so-called title. At first glance, they looked almost identical. Too identical. At the DMV office, Mark slid his glasses up his nose, typed into his computer, and leaned closer to the screen. "Here's yours," he said, tapping the monitor. "Registered to you, clean history, no liens, no salvage, perfect." "Okay," I said, heart thumping. "Now check hers." He entered the second VIN slowly. The system blinked, and then ping, a record appeared. Mark frowned. "Well, this is interesting." "What?" I asked, leaning in. "This VIN is close. Really close. But notice here, yours ends in 3847. Hers ends in 384T. I blinked. "A letter instead of a number?" He nodded grimly. "Classic cloning trick. Criminals take a real VIN and alter it by one digit or character to create a duplicate identity for a stolen car. To the untrained eye, or a lazy inspector, it looks legit. But in the system, it doesn't match factory formatting." I felt my stomach drop. "So Karen's Karis either stolen," Mark cut in, lowering his voice, "or it was rebirthed with forged documents. Either way, that title she's waving around, total forgery. It wouldn't pass a serious DMV check." I sat back in the hard plastic chair, stunned. Karen hadn't just been lying. She had been scammed. Someone sold her a cloned car, and now she thought I was the thief. Mark slid me a sticky note with the DMV's fraud investigation hotline. "You didn't hear this from me, but you'll want to call them. And keep every scrap of paperwork you have. If this escalates, and it will, you'll need a bulletproof trail. I nodded, gripping the note like it was a lifeline. For the first time since this nightmare started, I had proof. But deep down, I knew this discovery wouldn't calm Karen down. If anything, it would make her more dangerous. People like her didn't like being proven wrong, and once the word fraud entered the picture, she'd go from neighborly nuisance to cornered animal. I walked out of the DMV into the afternoon. Son, a single thought burning in my mind. The war with Karen was no longer just about a car. It was about exposing the truth before she destroyed me completely. I walked into the police station with my folder thick with documents, every page meticulously organized. The officer at the front desk barely looked up until I slid the folder toward him. Inside were the DMV records, repair receipts, insurance statements, and most importantly, a neatly cataloged timeline proving my ownership of the car. But the real dagger was the video footage from my garage security camera, a compilation showing the car parked in the same spot, night after night, stretching back years. When the detectives pulled the footage onto their screen, their eyebrows rose. Hard to fake this, one muttered. Still, Karen wasn't backing down. She stormed into the precinct 2 days later, arms crossed, her shrill voice echoing through the hallway. He's manipulating the evidence. I just bought that car. And he hacked the system to make it look like it was his all along. Her desperation was almost theatrical, but it only fueled the detectives' suspicion. They'd already started digging deeper, cross-checking her paperwork against state databases. That's when the first cracks appeared. One detective called me later that week, his tone sharp with interest. "Mr. Carter, we've uncovered something peculiar. Several vehicles tied to Karen's HOA associates, neighbors, board members, even her cousin, all have VINs that don't match clean registration records. Looks like duplicates, maybe even fraudulent transfers." The words hit me like a freight train. Karen's antics weren't just harassment. They might be the tip of a much bigger scheme. I pictured her smug face from the HOA meetings, the way she lorded over petty infractions like grass height or mailbox paint. It wasn't just about control, it was about profit. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces started clicking into place. Detectives began quietly interviewing other residents, combing through DMV filings, and checking financial records linked to Karen's HOA network. Each discovery was another domino teetering, ready to topple. And the funniest part? Karen didn't see it coming. She thought she was tightening the noose around my neck, when in reality, she was building a case that could collapse her entire empire. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight on my chest lift just a little. The tide was turning, but I also knew one thing for certain. Desperate people make reckless moves, and Karen cornered would be more dangerous than ever. The sirens had barely faded from that chaotic night when detectives started peeling back the layers of Karen's wild accusation. At first, it seemed like just another HOA squabble gone too far. But soon the case shifted from a neighborhood dispute into something far bigger and darker than anyone had imagined. Within weeks, law enforcement announced the discovery of a multi-state stolen vehicle ring. What started with one suspicious call about a stolen car had snowballed into the exposure of a sophisticated criminal network. The operation was elaborate. Investigators revealed that high-end vehicles were being stolen from states as far as Texas, Nevada, and Arizona. The thieves then used a tactic known as VIN washing, erasing or altering the vehicle identification numbers to hide the car's true origins. Forged titles were produced, complete with counterfeit state seals, and the vehicles were resold through shady dealerships or private sales. Buyers thought they were getting legitimate bargains, unaware they were driving stolen property. The real shock came when detectives tied the operation back to the HOA itself. What seemed like an ordinary suburban association, with its endless rules about lawn height, mailbox paint colors, and driveway parking, was actually being used as a cover for laundering. Vehicles? It turned out the HOA board had approved a series of strange budget items under the guise of community fleet purchases. On paper, it looked like the association was acquiring small utility vehicles for landscaping, security patrol, or maintenance work. In reality, those purchases never went to the neighborhood.
Instead,
They served as a smokescreen for funneling stolen cars through fake invoices and fleet acquisitions. But the most jaw-dropping detail came when a familiar name surfaced in the reports: Karen's brother-in-law. He wasn't just a board member. He was one of the key organizers, linking the HOA to interstate traffickers. Detectives believed he used Karen's position as HOA president to shield suspicious activities from scrutiny. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes at Karen's nosy behavior now whispered in disbelief. The same woman who had called 911 over garage doors and garbage bins had been living at the center of a criminal enterprise. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Her false accusation against me had helped crack the very scheme she was unknowingly protecting. Federal agents soon joined the case, working with local police to map out the stolen vehicle pipeline. Subpoenas hit the HOA office, seizing records, financial reports, and even meeting minutes. Every line item was scrutinized. What had once been mundane HOA bureaucracy now read like a crime ledger. And the more investigators dug, the more connections they uncovered, stretching beyond our neighborhood, beyond our city, into a sprawling network that had quietly thrived under the radar for years. The community's sense of safety was shattered. Residents began questioning how many of their dues had been siphoned into this scheme, and whether anyone else on the board had been complicit. But one thing was certain: this was no longer just Karen being Karen. This was a scandal that would put our entire neighborhood on the evening news, and me unwillingly at the center of it. Karen's arrogance had reached a fever pitch. The petty notices never stopped. Grass half an inch too tall, a trash can wheeled out 5 minutes too early, a delivery box left on my porch for more than a day. Each envelope slipped under my door felt less like HOA enforcement and more like personal warfare. But what she didn't know was that the game had changed. Unmarked police cars rolled quietly through the neighborhood at night. Their headlights stayed dim, their presence unannounced. They weren't here for me, they were watching her. Every move Karen made was being logged, every false report cross-checked. Still, she couldn't resist pressing harder. One evening, just after midnight, I heard a faint tapping against the side of my house. At first, I thought it was just branches brushing against the siding, but then came the low squeak of shoes shifting against gravel. I froze, listening. Then a flicker of light. A thin white beam cut across the cracks in my garage door. She was out there. I crept to the window overlooking the driveway. Karen stood on her toes, flashlight in hand, trying to peer through the small pane of glass near the top of my garage. She looked frantic, her face twisted in frustration as she pressed against the glass as if expecting to catch me hiding some stolen property. My pulse hammered in my chest. Enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and quietly snapped a picture, making sure her face, the flashlight, and the act itself were crystal clear. Then I filmed a short video through the blinds, catching her in the act of trespassing on my property. When I stepped outside and flicked on the porch light, she jumped back so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. The flashlight beam jerked wildly before she killed it. Trying to compose herself, "Karen," I called evenly, though my voice trembled with fury. "What exactly do you think you're doing at 1 a.m. on my property?" She stammered, her excuse as sloppy as her cover story. I was just checking. The HOA has the right to not at midnight, not peeking in my garage window." My phone camera was still rolling, capturing every word. "This is harassment, and now it's trespassing. Keep talking. I'd love for the police to hear this." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. For once, she was speechless. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house, her slippers smacking the pavement with sharp, angry slaps. I stood there in the glow of my porch light, shaking with adrenaline. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to stop. She was too far gone, too desperate, too obsessed. And if the police weren't already closing in, I was certain of one thing: Karen was about to unravel completely. The courthouse buzzed with restless energy the moment the bailiff called the room to order. The trial had become the talk of the town. Neighbors, HOA members, and curious onlookers filled every seat. Even local reporters sat with notebooks in hand, eager to cover the scandal of an HOA president accused of fraud, harassment, and perjury. Karen strutted into the courtroom like she still owned the place, her tailored suit sharp but her eyes betraying nerves. She tried to keep her chin high, but the whispers from the gallery followed her all the way to the defendant's table. For once, she wasn't the one calling the shots. She was trapped under the weight of the system she thought she controlled. My attorney, a calm but razor-sharp professional, opened with a devastating narrative. He didn't just argue. I swear he painted a story with every piece of evidence. He began with the Lexus, producing the original bill of sale, insurance documents, and years of registration renewals that bore my name. Each page landed on the evidence table with a heavy thud, echoing across the room like a hammer driving nails into Karen's coffin. Then came the real blow. The detectives. They took the stand one after another, explaining how the VIN fraud network worked. According to them, Karen hadn't just stumbled into a mistake. She had knowingly bought a car that had been doctored to look like mine, complete with a falsified VIN. She had leaned on shady connections and thought no one would question her claim. But once the fraud unraveled, she had no way out. The prosecution's witnesses, some of Karen's supposed allies in the HOA, began to fold under cross-examination. One admitted Karen had pressured her, saying, "She told me to back her up or I'd lose my parking privileges." Another sheepishly confessed Karen threatened to raise HOA fees if they didn't side with her. With each reluctant admission, Karen's empire of intimidation crumbled. But the real knockout moment came when the jury watched the driveway footage. On the screen, Karen's shrill voice filled the courtroom. "That's my car. He stole it. Arrest him." Her face twisted with rage, her gestures frantic as she pointed at me while the police tried to calm her down. The video captured not only her false accusation, but also her utter lack of control. The courtroom fell into an almost stunned silence as the last seconds of the recording faded out. I glanced toward the jury box. Many jurors shook their heads. One even covered her mouth in disbelief. Karen, sitting rigid at her table, looked pale as though the oxygen had been sucked out of her lungs. When my attorney rose again, his voice was like steel. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the truth for yourselves. This isn't about property lines or HOA disputes. This is about a woman who abused her power, manipulated her neighbors, and committed fraud to ruin an innocent man. The evidence isn't just overwhelming, it's irrefutable." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the judge leaned back, adjusting his glasses with the faintest shake of his head, as if silently acknowledging how damning the case had become. Karen tried one last desperate move when her own lawyer put her on the stand. She launched into a long-winded monologue about being a pillar of the community and a victim of deceit, but her voice quivered, her words rambling into contradictions. My attorney sliced through her testimony like a scalpel, asking simple, direct questions she couldn't answer without stumbling. The gavel came down hard when she finally shouted, "This isn't fair! He stole everything from me." The judge ordered her to calm down, but the damage was done. By the end of the day, there was no mistaking it. Karen's carefully constructed image had gone up in flames, and the jury had seen the real woman behind the HOA presidency. Vindictive, manipulative, and desperate, the courtroom drama had lived up to its promise of fireworks, and everyone knew the verdict would be nothing short of explosive. The courtroom was packed the day the verdict came down. Cameras flashed as Karen and her closest associates, once smug and untouchable behind their HOA titles, were led in, their designer suits doing little to disguise the fear etched into their faces. The charges had stacked up like bricks: fraud, embezzlement, extortion, racketeering, even misuse of 911. What began as a neighborhood dispute had unraveled into a full-scale criminal empire masquerading as community management. When the foreman read the guilty verdicts, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the gallery. For years, people had lived under Karen's thumb, fined for weeds, threatened over fence colors, and intimidated into silence. Now justice had finally struck back. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder, and in that moment, the HOA's grip shattered. Within weeks, the county moved decisively. The HOA charter was dissolved, its accounts audited, and the neighborhood placed under direct municipal management. What once was controlled by a handful of self-appointed tyrants would now answer to the city, with every meeting open to the public and every dollar accounted for. New state laws followed soon after, inspired by the scandal. Laws that required transparency, capped the power of HOAs, and banned the kind of secretive backroom dealings that had fueled Karen's reign. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed. The atmosphere shifted, lighter, freer. No more anonymous letters tucked under doors. No more threats disguised as friendly reminders. Families painted their homes the colors they wanted. Kids played in front yards without parents worrying about a noise violation. And the best part? The endless stream of fines stopped. As for me, the Lexus sat shining in my driveway, its polished exterior a symbol of vindication on four wheels. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered the day Karen had screamed, accused, and called the police. Her paranoia the spark that burned her empire to ashes. Neighbors who once whispered about me now waved warmly when I passed. Some even stopped by to apologize, admitting they had been too afraid to speak up. Others just thanked me for standing up, for not backing down, for proving that one person's voice could crack the facade of power built on fear. The lawns still looked neat, the homes still beautiful, but now they reflected something real, a community, not a dictatorship. For the first time in a long while, it felt like home. And as Karen and her cronies traded their manicured lawns for prison yards, the neighborhood began its new chapter, one written not in fines and threats but in freedom. Months later, I was invited to speak at a town hall about HOA reform. Standing before a packed room, I realized the nightmare had sparked something larger. Change. What started as a false accusation over a car had unraveled a criminal empire and reshaped how communities across the state viewed their HOA boards.